Hello everyone, this is Charlie from the Bloomingdale Public Library, and today we're going to be discussing an application called Krita. So what exactly is Krita? Well, it's a free, open-sourced, professional-level digital painting program. There is a cost if you go through the various app stores like Steam or Google Play, and that's just a way of supporting the project while receiving automatic updates. Otherwise, if you go to krita.org, the download is free. Krita is a product of the Krita Foundation, which was founded about 20 years ago. It went through several name changes, and they settled on Krita, which is Swedish for crayon, and they are headquartered in Amsterdam. Krita is designed to be used with a drawing tablet, but a mouse works too. The advantage to using a drawing tablet is you'll be able to influence brushstrokes with things like pressure and pen angle. If you're interested in going that route, the range goes from like $30 to upwards of $2,000 depending on the size of the tablet and the kind of features you're looking for. We're not going to be discussing any drawing tablet features in Krita today. Krita is available for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and the Google platforms. It is not available on the Apple platforms, however, for licensing reasons, or at least that's the official stance. Krita is not designed to be a digital image editor like GIMP or Photoshop. Although that was the original direction, I guess they changed gears and they decided to focus more on creating original content than editing existing content, though there are editing features in Krita if the need should arise. The process of downloading and installing Krita is pretty simple and straightforward, but we'll go through it anyway just so you can be confident in what you're looking at. To start off, you want to open the browser of your choice. I'm going to use Firefox. And in the address bar, type in krita.org. And that should take you to a web page that looks something like this. You'll notice that there's a big blue button in the middle that says Get Krita Now. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And I believe the second page automatically detects your operating system, but I can't be certain because I've only used Windows. In any case, the big blue button is what we want here. Windows Installer 64-bit. We'll go ahead and click on that. And when I do, you see the download start up. And once that comes up, you can go ahead and click on that. Otherwise, if you don't go through the browser, you can go find the setup file in your download folder or whichever folder you have your downloads going to. I'm going to click on the download folder up here. And this is what the setup file should look like. Or if you have your icon set to large, that's a better look. We're going to go ahead and double click on that. Say yes to make changes to the device. And here it'll take a couple seconds for the setup file to unpack. Now somewhere in the middle of the setup, it's going to tell me that I already have Krita installed, but it'll let me go through the rest of the windows anyway. And if you do have issues with Krita crashing a whole bunch, this might be a process you'll need to redo anyway. First window, choose your language. I think we'll stick with English. There's the message that we've already got it installed. Hit OK. And that'll bring us to the Krita setup. Next. This is the GNU public license. If you've done much downloading and installing of free software, you've probably seen this before. Go ahead and read through it. You need to accept the terms if you want to continue. Hit Next. Choose an installation folder. I recommend leaving it alone. Hit Next. Here we have the option of installing shell integration. If you roll over it, it tells you that this just allows for thumbnails and properties of the Krita files to display. It's up to you if you want to leave that checked or not. Make your decision, click Next. If you left it checked, you'll have to read through the agreement for the extension. It's pretty short. Need to agree. And here's where you name the folder in your start menu for Krita. I'd probably just leave that alone. Hit Next. And then this is the last window before the big install, and that's just deciding whether or not you want a desktop icon. I would probably leave that checked, and then click Install. I've already got it installed, so I'm not going to sit through another installation progress bar. But you'll basically see lots of text scroll by. You'll see the progress bar slowly fill up, and after about a minute, you'll get a window that gives you the option to finish your setup. And once you do, if you chose to have a desktop icon, it should look just like this. Otherwise, you can go looking through your program files and find it in whatever you named the folder, which, like I said, I was going to leave it as the default. And there it is. And so we have Krita installed. All right, let's go ahead and open Krita. I'm just going to double click on the desktop icon. Otherwise, in Windows, you can find it in the Start menu. We start off with an image of Kiki, the cyber squirrel. That is the official mascot of Krita. I guess Krita also is Albanian for squirrel, which is where that comes from. So once she's gone, we're looking at what I'm going to call the Start screen. There's a whole bunch of stuff to look at here. So under the Start header, we have the New File option, which is what we'll eventually do. We also have Open File to open an existing file. I'm going to click on that just so we can see all of the different file types supported by Krita. So if I open that, you see the Krita extension is .kra, but we can also open GIMP images, as well as Photoshop images, and even PDFs. And all of that is in addition to the common image file types like GIFs, JPEGs, PNGs, and even SVGs, which are vector graphics. Krita does have some vector graphic capabilities, which we'll have a look at a bit later. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and cancel out of this. So continuing on, if you were working on documents before, they should appear under Recent Documents. You see I've got a screenshot there. Next to that, we've got community links. If you're connected to the internet, these will all take you somewhere. Of particular note is the user manual at the top. Go ahead and click on that. That will take us to the online manual. So you can see we've got options for tutorials on the left here, facts. If you're looking for something specific, you can do a search. Say you wanted to look at layers, which is already showing up there, because I was practicing this before. But if you type in layers, you see a whole bunch of spots where layers appears in the manual. I'm going to X out of that for now. You can have a look at the other links as you like. Below that is a space where we can drag an image to open it. It's just another way of opening a file. And then next to that is the news feed, which is disabled by default, but if you have an internet connection, you can just click Enable News and get the feed of the latest going on with Krita. I'm going to go to the menu here and disable it. So like I said, ultimately we were going to create a new file, so let's go ahead and click on New File, and that'll bring up this window. So the top option is a custom document, and this is where you can decide how wide and how tall you want your document to be, as well as the resolution. So you can either use the arrows to mess with it, or you can type something in if you want. And to the right we have options for units. Otherwise, if you wanted to start with one of the predefined set of options, say you're working with an 8.5 by 11 page, you can go to US letter, click on that, and it'll preset everything for you. If you have your own dimensions that you want to use and save, you just go down here where it says Save Image Size As, type in what you want, and save it. Although be aware, I don't know how to get it out once it's saved. But when you save your custom type, you can go to predefined and see your custom size at the bottom there. There's also color options, which I'm going to leave alone, and I would recommend you do so as well, unless you know your stuff. And we're going to click on the Content tab to see just a couple of other options we have, which is naming the document right off the bat, choosing more or fewer layers to start with, which we'll talk about layers in a bit. We also have the background color and opacity as well. So once you have everything the way you like, you can go ahead and click Create. Otherwise, just to look at some of our other options here, we've got Create from Clipboard. So if you copy or cut or take a screenshot, you can go ahead and create a document from that, and it'll show up in the preview here where it says Clipboard. I happen to take a screenshot earlier, so that's what's showing. And it'll preset all the width and height stuff for you depending on what you clipped. Going further down are just more templates. These actually all show up in the predefined menu as well that we were looking at under custom documents. But you can have a look at these at your leisure. A whole bunch of different options for different situations. So I am going to select A4, use this template. And from here, we've got a nice fresh document to start playing around with. All right, before we start making a mess, I'd like to take a quick look at the Krita interface. If you've done any work in any other drawing applications before, this all probably looks at least somewhat familiar. So starting with the top here, we've got the main menu, which if you've done any computing before, some of this should ring a bell. Many options here that we will probably not be getting around to today, but definitely float through there. Below the menu, we've got the toolbar. There's actually two toolbars. We've got the File toolbar and the Brush toolbar. On the right side, we have a bunch of panels which Krita calls dockers. And that is because of their ability to be docked and moved and things like that. We'll have a peek at that in just a bit. At the bottom, we have a status bar. We've got the brush preset. We've got the color, depth. We've got the resolution. If you linger on that, we get a little bit more information. We've got the ability to rotate our image. And we've got a zoom bar as well. So you can either use the slider or you can type in a value if that's easier. On the left side, we have what we call the toolbox, which is where all of our tools live. And we'll have a quick look at most of these by the end of the course, which leaves the middle, which is our workspace, and that's where our documents live and where we work on them. Above that is where they will be tabbed if you have more than one open. And just to show you what I mean, we'll go ahead and create another new document. You can see they're tabbed up at the top. I'm going to X one out, so we're back to just one. Now the thing about the Krita interface, much like other drawing applications, is you can customize the look of things quite a bit. So with the toolbars, if you roll over the bunch of dots here stacked in a line, you'll notice that the mouse cursor turns into a move cursor. And if you click and drag, now you can move the toolbar. So you can either move it around freely, or as you notice, if you go to certain places, it snaps into place. Generally, you can do the sides, top and bottom. I'm going to go ahead and put that back where it lived before. The dockers have a few more options attached to them. So you see here we've got two dockers tabbed together. If you click on the stacked rectangles, it'll pull it out. You can roll over the sides where it'll give you the double-sided arrows to increase or decrease the height and width. If you wanted to kill the docker, you can go ahead and exit in the upper right corner. If you wanted to bring it back or perhaps open up different dockers, you can go to Settings, Dockers, and that was the Advanced Color Selector. So again, you can snap these into place in various spots. And if you wanted to add them to a tabbing group, you just roll over the top of a group there, and you see it adds it to the tabs, which is where it lived before. And if you want to lock things into place, you just click on the little circle block on the upper left corner, and you'll see that the move options go away. So definitely go to settings, go to Dockers, and flow through the list of Dockers to see if there's anything you need to have a look at while you're working. I particularly like the undo history, so you can see how far you can undo and redo. But otherwise, we have the toolbox here, which is like a Docker, but moves around a little more freely. We don't have the options to lock into place either like we did before. So it fits into all sorts of spots. You just click and drag on that little empty spot at the top there, and it moves around pretty freely. So in addition to all the manual customization you do, on the far right of the toolbar, if you click on the Choose Workspace, you've got some other options here. If I click on Animation, you see how it gives you a whole bunch of different Dockers, resizes things in a different way, gives you a completely different look for a different kind of workflow. And animating in Krita is basically generating one frame at a time manually. It's not like Blender where things are automatically done for you. I'm going to go back to default and leave that as our quick look at the Krita interface. Okay, so I think it's finally time to start putting some marks on the document. We're not going to be creating any masterpieces today, but hopefully we'll at least cover some of the less intuitive nuances of the more common tools. So with that said, we'll start with the toolbar, going from left to right. You'll notice as we roll over a command, it will give us a tooltip, which has a description as well as the shortcut. So the first guy, going from left to right, is the create a new document. Shortcut is Control-N. Open an existing document is next to that, or Control-O. And then saving the current document, which they don't give the shortcut, but as you might guess, it's Control-S. Next to that is the undo command. Shortcut for that is Control-Z. That's definitely one worth knowing. It's probably the most important command in any application. And next to that is the redo command, which in Krita is Control-Shift-Z. So that's it for the file toolbar. For the brush toolbar, we start with the gradient options. So if we click on that, you see a list of included gradients. We also have options to add gradients or edit existing gradients. And we'll look at that a little bit more when we get to the gradient tool. Next to that is the pattern options. So there's a bunch of included patterns to choose from, as well as the ability to create custom patterns, but I'm not going to really get into patterns anymore for today. Next to that is the foreground and background color selectors. So the top square is going to have the foreground color. If you click on that, you've got a nice little color wheel to adjust your colors with. Pick the one you want and hit OK. The bottom square is the background color. Again, it works just the same way. The double-sided arrow in the upper right corner is to swap between the two. And the black and white squares in the bottom left corner are to set the foreground and background to black and white, which I'm not going to do right now. Next to that is the edit brush settings. And frankly, this is where people get their money's worth out of Krita. So if you click on this guy here, you'll notice the default brush doesn't have a whole lot of options. Definitely some things to mess with though. However, if you select a different brush preset, you'll notice there's a whole lot more going on. Frankly, this is what separates the hobbyists from the enthusiasts. There's a whole lot here that I am not going to touch today. There's probably several videos worth of content here, and I know for a fact that there's a bunch of people on YouTube that have covered this in depth. So if you're curious, the videos are out there. By all means, go have a look. But for today, I'm simply going to show you and X out. All right, next is the blending mode. So this is where we're finally going to start making some marks here. So I'm actually going to increase the size of the brush a bit and make some lines here. So again, this is how the strokes will blend. So we'll go ahead, we'll swap over to red here. And in normal mode, as you might guess, you just go right over it. If you play around with some of these other options though, if you go to addition, red plus blue equals a shade of purple there, or lavender. Go to divide. Apparently you get almost teal. Multiply. Almost black. And there's a whole bunch of other options here. These guys down at the bottom have options on top of options. Definitely go ahead and experiment with those and figure out what they all do on your own. Next to that is the eraser mode. You might have noticed over in our toolbox there is no eraser, but every brush can be turned into an eraser by selecting eraser mode. Now when I start to paint, I don't get any color. I simply erase what's already there. Go ahead and click and get out of that. The next guy here is called Preserving Alpha. And without getting too much into that one today, basically it means you can only color on what's already been colored. So I'll go ahead and choose another color here. We'll go green. Nice dark green. And if I start painting over nothing, I get nothing. If I start painting over what's already there, I am able to do that. So this is a nice way, if you have a shape, you can add some detail without going outside the lines because you're being restricted to within the lines. I'm going to deselect that for now. The next option is to reset your brush options. So you'll notice I increased the size of the brush to help illustrate a point here. If I click the reload presets, the size goes back to 40 pixels, which is rather small. There's a little down arrow here. If you click on that, you have options to some other brush options as well, which you can go ahead and play with and experiment and learn how those work on your own time. The final couple icons over here are for mirroring. So if I select the horizontal mirror tool, you'll notice I get this little line here that I can move back and forth. And if I start drawing on one side, things happen on the other, as you might expect for mirroring. Click on the right arrow here and you have options to lock things in place and things like that. The other mirror mode does exactly what you might expect. Just bring this guy down here. I start drawing on the bottom and things happen on the top. I'm going to hit delete to clear what I've got here. Alternatively, if you go to, I believe it's edit, you see down here it says clear and the shortcut is delete. So again, just hitting delete will clear the layer. And that is to demonstrate this last option here, which is wraparound mode. So go ahead and select that. Start drawing. This is basically to help if you were creating tiles. So if I zoom out here, you see we've got a tiled pattern, and it actually looks kind of interesting considering I was just scribbling. Then get out of that mode, zoom back in. I actually didn't mention it earlier, but to pan, you simply hold down the middle mouse button and move around. Alternatively, the scroll wheel is to zoom in and out. And if you don't have those options on your mouse for whatever reason, or you don't like using the scroll wheel for zooming and panning, you also have a zoom tool down here with the magnifying glass. You can click to zoom in. You'll notice that the scroll bar for the zoom option also is changing at the same time if you prefer to use that. use Control and click to zoom out. So again, with the tool selected, clicking zooms in, Control clicking zooms out. And this little hand here will help you pan without holding down the middle mouse button. So that's it for the toolbar. Next we'll cover the tools in the toolbox. Okay, so let's have a look at our toolbox, and we'll start off with the drawing tools. The first one of those being the freehand brush tool. Basically the tool you draw with. So to create a stroke with this guy, all you do is click, drag, draw your picture, release. Piece of cake. If you want to change the look of your brush stroke, remember you have all sorts of options in the brush toolbar. Or if you don't want to go through the hassle of editing a brush, you have all sorts of options in the presets in the lower right corner by default. So I highly encourage you to check these out, explore and experiment. I'll do a couple quickies just to demonstrate the variety of strokes that we have. But it really lends itself to experimentation. So all of these various brush presets can be applied to all the drawing tools we're working with, but because it might make it a little confusing when we start trying to draw rectangles and ellipses with these kind of strokes, I'm going to go back to the default brush before moving on. So I'm hitting delete to clear the layer, and we'll move on to the line tool. To use the line tool, it's the same thing. You just click, drag, and release. The only difference is you don't get a stroke until you let go. And what you do, you've got your line. If you click, then hold down Shift, you'll be able to change the angle of your line in increments of 15 degrees. So to make a 45-degree angle with your line is a piece of cake. Delete to clear the layer. Next up, rectangle tool. Once again, click, drag, release, and you will get your rectangle. If you were to click, then hold down Shift and release, you will get the rectangle known as a square, where all of the sides are the same length. If you were to click, hold down Control, you'll notice that you can still draw a rectangle of any shape, but it will be growing out from your first mouse click. So it's centered around your first mouse click. Now if you were to click, hold down Control and Shift at the same time, you get both effects at the same time, where you're growing from the center and you're restricted to a square. Now all of these tools will have some tool options, which are available in the Tool Options Docker. It is visible on the display by default, and it's paired with the advanced color selector. So if you click on the Tool Options tab, and we're going to drag this down a bit so we can see all the options, and these would be your options for the rectangle tool. So let's say we wanted to add a fill. You go from not filled to background color, which right now is set to red. Click and drag, and you have an outline, which is the foreground color, and a fill that is the background color. If you wanted to create a rectangle that is a certain width, you can go ahead and set it to 1000. And now your next rectangle will be set to 1000 pixels as long as this is locked. So you're locked to 1000 pixels. And that is our effect. You can do the same thing for the height or the ratio. I'm going to go ahead and unlock those dimensions for now. We also have the round X and round Y, which will round the corners of our rectangle, and by default they're chained together so that their values are the same, and honestly that's probably what you want. We'll go ahead and set this to 200 pixels, which means our corners will have a radius of 200 pixels. And now when I go to create my rectangle, you can see a 200 pixel radius around the edges is extremely round. But those are the tool options for the rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and set things back. Delete to clear the layer, And we'll move on to the ellipse, which basically works the same as the rectangle. Click, drag, release, and you get an ellipse that would fit inside the rectangle that you would have created otherwise. Click, hold down Shift, release to get a circle. Click, hold down Control, release to get an ellipse that's centered around your first mouse click. And then click, hold down Control and Shift, and you get the circle that expands from your mouse click. Hitting delete to clear the layer. Move on to the polygon tool. To use this guy, all you do is click for each vertex of your shape. And then when you're set to complete the shape, you can either hold down Shift and click, and it will complete automatically. Otherwise, what you can do is manually go back to the beginning of your path, and you'll see a little circle appear. Just click inside the circle, and the shape will be completed. Piece of cake. Hit delete to clear the layer. We'll move on to the polyline tool, which is basically the same as far as I can tell. The only difference being if you hold down Shift and then click, it ends the shape without completing the path. Delete to clear the layer. Next up is the, what are we calling it? The Bezier curve tool. So this is a vector tool, but we're using it in a paint layer, so we won't be able to edit it. The Bezier curve is a hard tool to use, but easy to edit later. But again, you can only do editing if you're working on a vector layer, and I will show you what that means in just a bit. As it stands, I'm kind of out of practice using it, but basically, if you click one vertex at a time, it works just like the polygon tool. However, if you click and drag on a vertex, that's when you start getting curves. And depending on how long the handles are and what angle they're at, it'll affect how your curve looks. Again, a very difficult tool to learn how to use, but when you can actually edit your curves after you're done, it's not so bad. Delete to clear the layer. The next tool is also a vector tool, and it's the freehand path tool. So basically when we select this, we can treat it like the freehand brush tool, but after we let go, things kind of smooth out a bit. So again, this is a vertex, or a vector tool rather, and it's something we can edit if we're working in a vector layer. Delete. The last two tools, I'm not going to really get into too deep, but just to show what they look like. The first one is the dynamic brush tool? Yep. And it's hard to explain, but there's basically kind of a delay and a rubber band effect as I draw and make curves. And how that acts is heavily affected by what your tool options are set to. If you add a high mass and a low drag, it gets extremely slippery, but it's kind of fun to use. So I'll leave that for you to experiment with. Delete to clear the layer. The last one we're going to look at is the multi-brush tool. So when I click on that, depending on what your settings are set to, you get some interesting effects. See, right now it's set to symmetry and smoothing is basic. I'm going to hit delete to clear the layer. We'll set this to snowflake, set brushes to 20, and you get some really nice designs. So hard to explain exactly what you're doing, but very fun and easy to experiment with. And that is a roundup of the drawing tools. Okay, next we're going to look at the selection tools, just briefly. There's a couple reasons you might want to use a selection tool. One reason would be to restrict your editing to a certain area so you don't color out of the lines. Another reason might be cutting pieces out and pasting them somewhere else. To create a selection area, I'm going to start off with the rectangular selection. You just do what you did with the drawing tool. Click, drag, release, and you have a selection area. To deselect, all you got to do is click outside the selection area. If you have various options selected or you're working with other tools, it might not work. So in that case, what you would do is go to select, deselect, and that will free you. So I'm going to go back and select an area. And to show what I mean by restricting your editing, I'm going to go ahead and choose the paintbrush tool here. And if I start scribbling around, you'll notice that I cannot paint outside the selected area. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. So you can see why that might be very useful when you're doing some detailing in some very tight, complicated areas. Another thing you might want to do is cutting pieces out and pasting them somewhere else. To demonstrate that, we'll go ahead and do an edit, cut, and it's gone. Now typically you work with a all white background or some sort of solid color background, but because I've only got one layer, we're looking at transparency. So let's go ahead and fix this hole. I'm going to go ahead and do an edit, paste, and things are back to normal, or at least so you would think. If we go ahead and look over in our layers Docker, we see that I created a second layer when I pasted. So if that's not what you intend, what you can do is go to layer, merge with layer below, and I'll put that pasted layer back into the original layer. Another thing you can do, if we go ahead and cut that out again, we want to paste it into the same layer we were working in. What you do is go to edit, paste into active layer, and now we're back to working with just one layer again. I'm going to go to select and deselect to get rid of our selection there. And now we'll have a look at some ways we can create some different selection areas. I'll go ahead and choose my rectangular selection area again, create a rectangle, and a way to expand this is by holding down Shift and creating another selection area. Another thing you can do is with the tool options open, we see actions up here. There's a whole bunch of them. I'm going to click on Add, and now we can just go ahead and select more areas. If we selected too much and we want to subtract some, we can go to the Subtract action and subtract. We can go ahead and scribble around and make a more interesting shape. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to deselect to get rid of it. And just to show some of our other selection methods, the first one we'll look at is the contiguous selection tool. Other applications call it the magic wand. And what that does is it grabs all of the area of a certain color. So if we start with a low threshold, we click on just the blue, and it will grab just the blue. If we want to take more colors than just that blue, we want to start bleeding into more of the purple and the red color, what we do is increase the threshold, and it will grab more similar colors than just the blue that we selected before. So as you see, it grabs a little bit more, increase the threshold, increases its selection, we go all the way up here, and it goes almost all the way across. So that's why I created a gradient here, is to demonstrate how increasing a threshold for the magic wand select will grab more and more area. I'm going to go to select, deselect. This guy here is the color select. So if we wanted to select all of one color all over the image, we can just go ahead and click on the color here. So if I click on this red circle, you see it grabs the red circle over here, and it grabs some of the red over here as well. And there's threshold settings for this as well. I'm going to select, deselect. And one last one I'm going to show you is the magnet select. So what that does is it finds lines of contrast and tries to trace them. And again, there's all sorts of settings you can do to kind of refine that. So I'm going to go ahead and select this circle here. Just kind of trying to trace the shape. Let the tool do the rest. And once you think you got it, you come over to the tool options and click complete. And there you go. Outside the lines a little bit, but for a first try, not too bad. And that is an overview of some of the selection tools. Okay, so next I'd like to look at some of our coloring tools. And we'll start with the gradient tool. In order to use a gradient, you first need a selection area. So let's get that out of the way first. I'm going to use the freehand select to create an interesting shape here. There you go. Once we have a selection area, next we need to create our gradient. So you can select any of the ones available if you like. But I'm actually going to choose the foreground and background and edit it. So to edit a gradient, what you can do is click and drag on the stops to move them. I'm going to move these in a little bit. You can click on the bar to create a new stop. And then you can double click on a stop in order to set its color. So I'm going to set this guy to green. Okay. If you wanted to get rid of a stop, you can just select it and hit delete, but I think I want to keep these three stops the way they are. You can also mess around with the opacity if you like, especially if you have something in your background. So sort them by values, and these are to set the stops to foreground and background. I think I like the way things are though, so I'm going to click OK. Then we're going to select the gradient tool. And to go ahead and create the gradient, what we need to do is click and drag, and that'll determine where the line begins and ends that we have our stops on. And once we're good, we just let go. And there you go. So this is a linear gradient. If we go over to the tool options, you see there's a bunch of other ways we could have gone about it. I'll let you look at that by yourself. But otherwise, I think we're pretty good. So next, we're going to look at the color selector. Let's see what they call it here. A sample from a color from the image or current layer. So again, I've seen it called a color picker and dropper. I'm just going to go ahead and click on it, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to select the green color. And what this will do is set the foreground color to whatever color I select here. So once I click on green, you see the foreground color switches to green. If I click on blue, it goes back to blue, red, etc. So with our foreground color set to the green in our gradient, I'm going to go ahead to this paint bucket tool, or as Krita calls it, fill a contiguous area of color with color or fill a selection. That's a terrible name for a tool, so I'm just going to call it the paint bucket tool. And once I select that, now it's going to want to fill in the selected area here, so we want to go to select, deselect, and now it will fill in the contiguous color that I click on. And just like before with the selection area, you can adjust the threshold if you want to take more or less of the area and paint over it. I'm just going to click on this white area here, and there we go. It's kind of an interesting effect. So that is the gradient, color picker, and paint bucket tools. Next, we're going to look at the layer editing tools. And that's these three guys right here. We'll start with this guy that looks like a frame and it's the layer transform tool. So you'll notice once I click on that, we get all these handles around the layer. So if we click on one of the corner handles, we can adjust the height and width. If we click on one of the handles on the sides, it's just one dimension or the other. I'm going to undo all that. If you hover around the outside of the layer, you have a rotation icon that lets you rotate your layer like that. Undo it. And if you hover over one of the edges, you see an up and down arrow or a left and right arrow, and that's to skew the layer. And if you start going back and forth, you can see what that does. Again, I'm going to undo that. I don't like any of those changes. But that's how you use the layer transform tool. The guy next to that is the layer move tool. I'm going to click on that guy, and just like you'd think, you click and drag on it, and it moves everything in the layer. Once again, I'm going to undo all those changes. And we'll have a look at the last tool here, which is the layer crop tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that guy. And now, once I start clicking, everything goes black. And as I click and drag, things lighten up so you can see what exactly I'm cropping. I'm just going to crop around my little shape here. If you right click inside your crop area, you see you have options to lock various dimensions, to center the crop or whatever. Once you're good, you just select crop from these actions here, and it crops the layer. So that is all of the layer tools and some of the color tools. I'll let you experiment with the rest of the coloring tools on your own. Next, I'd like to talk about layers, at least for a little bit. Layers are an important concept when you're working with digital art, and it's incorporated in most of the major digital drawing and editing applications. The whole idea is you can alter the content on lower layers by obscuring it with content on higher layers. So you alter the appearance of the content on the lower layers without actually altering it. It's considered a form of non-destructive editing. Using layers is also a good way of organizing your content, which is particularly helpful once you start dealing with dozens and dozens of layers. You'll notice that Krita incorporates multiple layers in some of its templates by default. If you wanted to create a new painting layer, which is usually the kind of layer you want, all you gotta do is click on the plus symbol in the layers docker, which is visible by default. Just click on the plus sign, and there you go. It creates a new paint layer on top of the active layer. Just so we can see it, I'm going to create a big old blue rectangle right in the middle. And because it's on the top layer, it obscures the view of everything. If you wanted to create a different kind of layer other than a painting layer, you can click on the little down arrow next to the plus sign, and you can see all the other different kinds of layers, including masks, which we're not going to talk about today. If you wanted to duplicate the selected layer, you click on this little symbol of stacked squares. And if I get the layer movement tool out here, you can see, sure enough, we've got multiple layers. I'm going to undo that for now, though. If you want to change the position of a layer, all you got to do is select it, and you can click these down and up arrows. And you can see over in the workspace that the rectangle goes up and down the stack. It actually disappears on the bottom because the green square does not have a transparent background. It has a white background, so it obscures the view when the rectangle goes all the way back. So we'll leave it right there for now. If you wanted to change some more of its properties, you can click on this little menu symbol here next to the arrows. You can give the layer a name. Change its opacity so you can see the layers below it a bit. There's also blending mode. You can give it a color label just to show you what it looks like. I'll choose red. You see over here, the symbols turn red. You can also mess around with the properties, which we'll talk about in a bit, and mess around with the color channels, which I'm not going to touch. So when I click OK, sure enough, you can see through things a bit because its opacity is set to 51%, and you can actually see that over here in the layers docker as well. Set it back up, set it back down. If we want to get rid of the layer, there's also a garbage can. Just go ahead and click on the garbage can, and the layer goes bye-bye. I'm going to undo that to bring it back. Okay, took a second there. It was still not on me. But we're back. And if you wanted to do a couple other things with the layer, what you can do is right click and you'll have access to a whole bunch more options, including cut, copy, paste, flatten, and merge, etc. And that is a very quick and brief overview of working with layers. Okay, so we're getting near the end here. Next topic is vector tools and vector layers. And we're going to start this discussion off with the text tool. The text tool is the capital T at the top of the toolbox. Incidentally, these 4 top tools here are the vector layer only tools. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the text tool. And then to actually put some text down, you have to click and drag to make a rectangle. Doesn't really matter how big it is though. And that'll pop this window up here. You'll also notice over in the layers docker that a new vector layer was created automatically. So once you have this window up, you can enter your text here. Change the styling if you like. Definitely make it bigger so we can read it. And there's some other formatting options here, but this is good enough for me now. I'm going to click Save. Close, and there we go. Once you're done entering your text, the Move Shapes tool or Select Shapes tool is automatically selected, and you can roll over the text shape and you'll get the Move cursor. So click and drag to move your text shape around. If you roll your cursor over the top, bottom, and side handles, you can skew your text. If you roll over the outside of the corners, you can rotate your text. I'm going to undo all that. If you roll over the handles at the top, bottom, sides, and corners, you'll get these double-sided arrows that make it seem like you can extend the size of the shape, but you can't really, besides making more or less text or changing its size. If you wanted to edit the text once it's already in its shape, you can click on the text tool, double click on the text, and it'll bring this window back open. And enter some more text. Save and close. Alternatively, you can select the text tool, select the text, and over in the tool options you can click Edit Text. Same thing. If you click on the Edit Shapes tool, over in the tool options, you'll get the option to convert to path. And that is something you'll get for basically all of the shapes. If you can convert to path, what happens is you get all of the nodes and Bezier curves to edit at your whim. I am not going to do that for the text right now though, so I'm going to undo that. And instead we're going to look at the calligraphy tool. So you can do some calligraphy in the vector layer that we're already on. Otherwise, if you're on a painting layer and you try to do some calligraphy, even though you already have a vector layer available, it just puts it on its own new vector layer. If you want to move your calligraphy shape, once again you choose the Select Shapes tool and you have all the same options. If you choose the Edit Shapes tool, once again, you have the option to convert to path, and when you do that, you get all of the vector shape editing options, which I'm not going to get into right now. I do go into them at length in my Inkscape class. These are basically the same options. You can add and remove nodes, add and remove segments, and do some things with the Bezier curves. So I invite you to go ahead and play around with that. Incidentally, all of the vector tools that we could use on the painting layers are also much more easier to work with when you're already on a vector layer. So now, when you go to the Edit Shapes tool, select the shape. We don't even have to convert it to a path because it already is one. If you didn't have a calligraphy or a text shape in your image and you needed to create a vector layer manually, you can go to the little down arrow next to the plus sign here in the Layers Docker and go to Add Vector Layer, and there you go. Incidentally, just like you couldn't use the Select Shapes tool in a painting layer, you cannot use the Freehand Brush tool in a vector layer. You'll get this little error right here. So that's all I've got to say about vector tools and vector layers for today. Okay, so we're going to finish up by discussing saving and exporting. When you're all set to save your project, you can go ahead and hit Control S, click on the icon of a disk up in the taskbar, or go to File and click Save. And even if you click File Save, if it's your first time saving, you'll be directed to the Saving As window, which will give you an opportunity to name your project. We'll go ahead and name it Project 1. By default, it will save as a .kra file, which is probably what you want. Even if you're planning on just immediately saving a PNG or JPEG version of what you just created, it's a good idea to keep a Krita document version of what you created as well, just in case you have to go back and make changes or any number of various situations come up. So we'll go ahead and save a Krita document version of my project. And there we go, piece of cake. Now to go about exporting, all you do is go to File, Export, and I swear this is the same window with a different title. But what we're going to do is click on Save as Type, choose a type of file we want to save as. I'm going to go with PNG, and click Save. Depending on the file type you plan on saving as, you're going to get a window with all sorts of options for quality and compression. Go ahead and have a look at your options. Click OK when you're ready. And there we go. We have exported a PNG version of my Krita document. We'll go find it just to make sure it's there. And there it is, PNG file. So, it was a kind of long one, but I appreciate you sticking with me. I hope I got you excited about learning about Krita, sparked your interest, and that's all I've got. I hope you have a good day. Thanks again.